Consuelo Vanderbilt was one of the most talked about heiresses of the late 19th century. She was born into staggering wealth, yet also inherited the high expectations and unrelenting pressures that came with being a Vanderbilt. Though her name became a symbol of American social prestige and European aristocratic ties, her personal journey was shaped by heartbreak, a marriage arranged against her will, and her eventual quest for genuine fulfillment. Today we'll take a thoughtful look at how Consuelo Vanderbilt found her own path in a world more concerned with status than individual happiness. We'll trace her story from her demanding upbringing under a formidable mother, through a forced cash-for-class marriage to the Duke of Marlborough, to her later years as a philanthropist and advocate for women's autonomy. Let's begin. Born on March 2nd, 1877, Consuelo Vanderbilt entered the world at a time when her illustrious family was quickly becoming one of the wealthiest and most influential in America. She was the daughter of William Kissam Vanderbilt and Alva Erskine Smith, names that carried serious clout in the swirling social scene of New York's late 19th century elite. Though the Vanderbilts had begun their climb to prominence through the shipping and railroad empires of Cornelius the Commodore Vanderbilt, Consuelo came along at a point when her family's fortunes were already well established. To put it bluntly, she never lacked for material comforts. From the moment she arrived, she was surrounded by opulence, a sparkling nursery adorned with lace canopies, the hum of attentive nurses, and an unending stream of gifts from the who's who of New York society. Yet it would be wrong to assume her early childhood was entirely carefree. Her mother, Alva Vanderbilt, was a formidable figure, ambitious, exacting, and determined to see her family surpass even the old money Astors in terms of social standing. Alva believed wholeheartedly in turning the Vanderbilt name into an emblem of American aristocracy. She poured her energies into building lavish mansions, hosting extravagant galas, and holding her children to the highest standards of decorum. Consuelo, as her only daughter, bore the brunt of Alva's ambitions. From a tender age, Consuelo was instructed in the art of being a lady, how to walk gracefully, how to bow at just the right angle, and how to modulate her speaking voice to project both confidence and refinement. What often went unnoticed by the wider public was how these rigorous expectations weighed on Consuelo's spirit. In her memoir, The Glitter and the Gold, she would later reflect on the emotional strain of growing up under Alva's watchful eye. She described moments of longing for a more normal childhood, one with fewer rules and more freedom. Still, within the gilded confines of the Vanderbilt household, personal longing was secondary to social duty. If Alva decided that learning French or practicing a waltz for hours on end was necessary, Consuelo had little choice but to comply. By the time Consuelo hit her teenage years, the Gilded Age in America was in full swing. Industrial expansion, massive financial speculation, and a booming economy made millionaires out of men who had once been modest entrepreneurs. Families like the Vanderbilts were at the zenith of wealth. New York society, dominated by names like Astor, Belmont, Whitney, and, of course, Vanderbilt, was locked in a perpetual competition to see who could build the grandest mansion, give the most lavish party, or wear the most resplendent jewels. Alva was a trailblazer in this world, orchestrating legendary events that left reporters gasping at her creativity and extravagance. She once hosted a costume ball so opulent that it made front-page news across the country. Consuelo was often the star at such gatherings, dressed in elaborate gowns imported from Paris, her dark hair pinned up to evoke the latest European fashions. Courtiers, both American and foreign, took note of her striking features and calm dignity. But Alva's ambitions went far beyond American shores. Like many of her contemporaries, she was fascinated by European aristocracy. In the late 19th century, a trend emerged where wealthy American families sought to marry their daughters into old British and European noble lines. These marriages were often cynically termed cash for class deals. American money shoring up aristocratic estates in financial decline, in exchange for a valuable title that conferred social prestige back in the United States. The press dubbed these young heiresses dollar princesses. Consuelo Vanderbilt, poised, charming, and immensely wealthy, became one of the leading figures of this phenomenon. Alva targeted a prize that to her seemed like the pinnacle of nobility: Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough. The Dukes of Marlborough hailed from the illustrious Spencer Churchill family, with a lineage that traced back to John Churchill, the famed first Duke of Marlborough, a military hero who'd earned his rank through victories during the War of the Spanish Succession. Their ancestral seat, Blenheim Palace, stood as one of the grandest estates in England, rivaling even royal residences in its scale and splendor. The problem was that the 9th Duke, though possessing an ancient title, needed money, a lot of money. Blenheim Palace was crumbling under the weight of repairs and a general lack of funds. Alva saw this as the perfect arrangement. Her daughter could become a duchess, and the Vanderbilt fortune could save Blenheim. But the match was not to Consuelo's liking. She was just 17 when her mother started pushing for the engagement. Consuelo harbored affections for someone else, an American suitor named Winthrop Rutherford. They were deeply in love, at least in the starry-eyed way young people in high society could be. When Alva discovered her daughter's true heart, she took drastic measures. Consuelo later wrote of being locked in her room or forced to sit for hours while Alva lectured her on duty, social expectations, and the necessity of a good match. Under immense emotional pressure, and with her mother's threat to disown her hanging overhead, Consuelo relented. She accepted the Duke of Marlborough's proposal. On November 6, 1895, one of the most talked about weddings of the era took place at St. Thomas Episcopal Church in New York. Consuelo was just 18. Crowds lined the streets for a glimpse of the bride in her sumptuous white gown, rumored to have required innumerable fittings and costing a small fortune. The media coverage was intense. This was no ordinary union, but the forging of a transatlantic alliance uniting American money and British nobility. The ceremony itself was grand, with socialites, diplomats, and notable figures packing the pews. Yet behind her bridal veil, Consuelo wept, and not from joy. The wedding felt like a funeral for her personal dreams and desires, sealing her fate as a duchess in a foreign land she barely knew. The newlyweds traveled to England, where Consuelo took up her role as the Duchess of Marlborough at Blenheim Palace. The estate was magnificent, but it often felt chilly and overwhelming. Adjusting to British aristocratic customs was challenging. Consuelo was expected to host lavish dinners, supervise dozens of household staff, and appear at endless social functions. She wasn't entirely naive. She'd been educated and trained for such responsibilities. Still, living the reality was far different than practicing a curtsy in her mother's drawing room. The Duke, for his part, had his own set of expectations. Although he clearly appreciated Consuelo's dowry, estimated at over $2.5 million, he was less openly affectionate. Their personalities clashed. The Duke was introverted, more interested in the estate's restoration and in hunting parties than in forging a genuine emotional connection with his young wife. Despite her initial unhappiness, Consuelo rose admirably to the challenge. She took on philanthropic endeavors, championing causes like education and welfare programs for the local communities around Blenheim. She became known in England for her charitable visits and her sincere interest in improving lives. It was a role that gave her a semblance of purpose, a chance to use her wealth and title for something good. Many British subjects found her warm, approachable, and genuinely kind, qualities that weren't always associated with the aloof aristocracy. And so, ironically, while her marriage itself was often cold and loveless, Consuelo managed to create a positive public image for the Duchess of Marlborough brand. But behind the scenes, cracks in the marriage grew deeper. The Duke and Duchess had 2 sons, John Albert William, the Marquis of Blandford, and Lord Ivor Spencer Churchill, fulfilling the dynastic requirement of an heir and a spare. Yet there was scant emotional closeness between husband and wife. Consuelo's mother, Alva, who had orchestrated this union, now found it less shiny than she'd hoped. She'd believed the marriage would be a glorious success, solidifying her family's place in the stratosphere of the world's elite. Instead, she witnessed her daughter's distress from across the Atlantic. Over time, Alva would even come to regret forcing the match, later supporting Consuelo in pursuit of a more fulfilling life. One of the turning points came in the early 1900s, when the Duke began to spend more time away from Blenheim on personal pursuits, leaving Consuelo to handle the estate's social obligations. During this period, rumors spread of extramarital affairs on both sides, if gossip columns were to be believed. Consuelo found friendship and companionship outside her formal marriage, though the details of her private liaisons remained somewhat murky. Aristocratic circles in Edwardian England were notoriously tangled with discreet dalliances and quiet understandings. Still, the emotional detachment between the Duke and Duchess grew too large to ignore. By 1906, they were living essentially separate lives under the same palatial roof. In 1907, the Duke decided to take the bold step of seeking an annulment. Now, in Catholic theology, annulment means a marriage was never valid from the start. The Church typically grants annulments on very specific grounds, but the Duke and Duchess were part of the Anglican tradition, which adds another layer of complexity. Nevertheless, what they sought was effectively a legal dissolution, something that was complicated by their high-profile status and the question of inheritance for their sons. Ultimately, in 1920, after years of negotiation, they secured a civil divorce. Interestingly, the Vatican granted an annulment too, despite the fact that they had been married in an Episcopal church and had produced 2 children. The annulment was likely facilitated by their social rank and connections. Consuelo was deeply relieved to finally see an end to a union she described as loveless from day one. What followed was a chance at genuine happiness for Consuelo. In 1921, she married Jacques Balsan, a French aviator and industrialist who was also a pioneering balloonist and a dashing figure in his own right. This union, in stark contrast to her first marriage, was founded on mutual affection and shared interests rather than parental coercion or economic convenience. The couple settled in France, and Consuelo embraced a life that was simultaneously elegant and more relaxed. Jacques admired her philanthropic drive, and together they continued various charitable activities. Their marriage gave Consuelo a second chance at companionship, one filled with warmth and respect, an outcome she might have imagined impossible in her darker times at Blenheim. Meanwhile, the world around them was changing rapidly. The Roaring Twenties brought new cultural freedoms, especially for wealthy American expatriates in Europe. Although Consuelo was no stranger to scandal, her divorce had made global headlines. She was able to carve out a life that felt truer to her own desires. With Jacques, she hosted salons that attracted artists, writers, and society figures from across Europe and the United States. She maintained connections to her Vanderbilt roots, traveling frequently to the States and staying in touch with her friends in New York. In social circles, she was often held up as an example of a liberated duchess, someone who had walked away from an unhappy aristocratic arrangement and found genuine love. As time went on, Consuelo also became a vocal advocate for women's rights, shaped in part by her memories of how she'd been treated as a bargaining chip in her mother's quest for social standing. While she never became overtly political, she spoke out privately and sometimes publicly in favor of greater autonomy for young women, especially when it came to marriage decisions. Many younger women of her acquaintance heard her cautionary tale and gleaned from it the courage to push back against controlling parents or guardians, because, for all her wealth and high birth, Consuelo understood the emotional cost of sacrificing personal freedom. She wanted other women, whether part of the aristocracy or not, to see that there was life after defiance and that it was possible to chart one's own path. If you read her memoir, The Glitter and the Gold, you'll sense the tone of retrospective wisdom. Written with the benefit of distance and reflection, it illuminates Consuelo's feelings about her youth, her forced marriage, and her eventual emancipation. She recounts her mother's fierce influence and how, as a timid teenager, she felt powerless to oppose Alva's will. She also writes about the social swirl of the late 19th century, offering an insider's view of a world that was simultaneously glamorous and oppressive. Even in her writing, there's an air of dignity. Consuelo rarely indulges in bitterness or vengeful commentary, even though she had every reason to do so. Instead, she presents herself as someone who navigated adversity and emerged stronger. Now let's talk about the broader cultural impact. Consuelo Vanderbilt's life resonated far beyond the personal drama of one wealthy heiress. She became an emblem of the Gilded Age phenomenon, where American money collided with European titles, prompting an entire generation of marriages that shaped transatlantic relationships for decades. Consuelo was arguably the face of that phenomenon. The sheer scale of her wedding to the Duke of Marlborough, complete with thousands of curious onlookers in the streets of Manhattan, was a media sensation. Countless American mothers envied Alva for securing a duke for her daughter, a testament to how the superficial glamour of a noble title held powerful sway in a young and ambitious society. On the flip side, after the divorce, Consuelo emerged as a symbol of autonomy, an object lesson in the folly of forcing such matches purely for social advantage. In her later life, she dedicated herself to charitable causes and used her position to help those less fortunate. She supported hospitals, contributed to the Red Cross during wartime, and remained devoted to philanthropic work in France and the U.S. She also funded and took part in organizations that promoted child welfare and women's education. Friends often noted her warmth and sincerity in these efforts. She wasn't simply writing checks. She was showing up, speaking to community leaders, and ensuring that practical solutions were being implemented. As World War I and later World War II swept across Europe, Consuelo's connections and resources proved invaluable in relief work. She assisted displaced communities, helped raise funds, and leveraged her Vanderbilt name to create meaningful support networks. There's a poignant irony here. While her aristocratic marriage might have begun as an emotionally painful bargain, it eventually opened doors that allowed her to do tangible good on both sides of the Atlantic. People who interacted with her in these humanitarian roles often came away with a sense that she was making up for lost time, channeling her energies into helping others in a way that might also have been personally healing. Despite her philanthropic successes, Consuelo never truly escaped the public fascination with her personal life. Newspapers and society columns followed her every move, especially once she settled in France with Jacques Balsan. Reporters conjured narratives of a fairy tale second marriage, or the duchess who found true love at last. While these headlines often oversimplified her experience, they did reflect a collective curiosity about how a woman so famously forced into a loveless union could eventually craft a life of her own choosing. That curiosity persists even now. Over a century later, we still find ourselves drawn to stories about Gilded Age heiresses who overcame stifling social norms. Then there's the matter of her relationship with her mother, Alva Vanderbilt. Alva, for all her faults, underwent her own transformation. She divorced William K. Vanderbilt, Consuelo's father, in 1895, the same year Consuelo married the Duke, and subsequently became a noted suffragist. Some believe that in hindsight, Alva's regret over her role in Consuelo's unhappy marriage spurred her to champion women's rights, including the right for women to choose their own destinies in matters of marriage. Later, Alva even assisted Consuelo's efforts to secure an annulment, publicly acknowledging that she had forced her daughter into the wedding. This mother-daughter dynamic, marked by early coercion but later by a form of reconciliation, adds a unique emotional layer to Consuelo's life story. It's a testament to the power of personal growth on both sides to heal old wounds, at least partially. If we fast forward to Consuelo's final chapters, we see a woman who quietly transcended the constraints into which she'd been born. She spent significant time in France with Jacques, living a life that blended European charm with American vigor. She traveled frequently, stayed active in charities, and occasionally returned to the United States for family events and philanthropic endeavors. Her sons, raised partly in British aristocracy, each navigated their own paths. The eldest, John, inherited the dukedom upon his father's death, continuing the Spencer-Churchill line at Blenheim. Consuelo maintained a cordial relationship with her former husband for the sake of their children, reflecting an emotional maturity that might seem surprising given the painful way their marriage began. Consuelo Vanderbilt Balsan passed away on December 6, 1964, at the age of 87. She'd lived through a staggering array of historical transformations: the Gilded Age, 2 World Wars, the Great Depression, and the onset of the modern era. Newspapers around the world printed respectful obituaries that described her life as a tapestry of luxury, heartbreak, resilience, and ultimately personal triumph. She was laid to rest far from the childhood home she once knew, having spent the majority of her later years in Europe. The eulogies and retrospectives painted her as both a relic of a bygone aristocratic age and an example of how one can navigate adversity to find authenticity. To understand why Consuelo Vanderbilt's life story still resonates, we need only look at the tensions between love and social expectation that continue to plague us today. Though times have changed and few parents now hold the power to arrange marriages in quite the same way, the overarching struggle between personal happiness and external pressure is timeless. Consuelo's journey invites us to consider the costs of ignoring our own hearts for the sake of climbing a social ladder. Moreover, she represents a figure who wielded her privilege for philanthropic good, reminding us that wealth and status can, when guided by empathy, be tools for positive change. Let's not overlook the personal strength it took for her to separate from the Duke. Divorce was still scandalous in British aristocratic circles, and no matter how loveless the marriage, it was deeply frowned upon to break it. The fact that she pursued an annulment underscores her determination to reclaim her life on her own terms, even if it meant risking social ostracism. That risk paid off, giving her the companionship of Jacques Balsan, an indication that sometimes The greatest leaps toward happiness involve leaving behind the security of an established existence. If you're ever in Oxfordshire, England, and you visit Blenheim Palace, take a moment to imagine Consuelo walking those halls. Perhaps she's gazing out a window, daydreaming of simpler times, or a future that might truly belong to her. It's easy to get lost in the grandeur of that palace, the frescoes, the stately corridors, the perfectly manicured gardens. Yet beyond the architecture lies a human tale, a young American heiress forced into a role she never truly wanted, persevering through it all to shape a life that was, by the end, more of her own making. Thank you for spending this time with me, delving into the life of Consuelo Vanderbilt, a name that dazzled the headlines of her day, but whose deeper struggles and triumphs deserve our attention. If you enjoyed this exploration, feel free to leave a comment or share your own reflections on Consuelo's story. And if you'd like to hear more histories of remarkable figures, famous, infamous, or somewhere in between, be sure to subscribe so we can keep journeying through the past together. In the end, Consuelo Vanderbilt stands as a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure, to adapt, and to find fulfillment beyond the world's expectations. May her story inspire you to seek your own path, even when it leads down unexpected roads. Take care, and I'll see you next time for another story from the chapters of history that still resonate with us today.